Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Welcome. Here's some of the top stories we've been following.
Today was deadline day for Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, as 24 Liberal MPs are calling on his resignation. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre says should his party form government, he will scrap the federal sales tax on new homes sold for under $1 million. And a $290 million class action lawsuit is underway in Ontario as Ottawa residents sue organizers of the Freedom Convoy.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. Well, today was deadline day for Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to respond to a request by 24 Liberal MPs calling for his resignation as party leader. Trudeau has already said he plans to stay on as the head of the Liberal Party of Canada. Now, on Tuesday, Trudeau faces another deadline, this time from the Bloc Québécois. Party leader Yves-François Blanchet has threatened to begin discussions with other opposition parties about toppling the minority government if the Liberals don't pass two pieces of legislation. One being an increase to old age security for all seniors, and the other to bolster Canada's supply management system. Federal Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre says should his party form government, not only will he scrap the carbon tax, but he'll also get rid of the federal sales tax on new homes sold for under $1 million. Poilievre said a Tory government would also abolish the Housing Infrastructure Fund. It will set aside $5 billion for agreements with provinces and territories in exchange for adopting certain housing policies. Poilievre says a lot of the money for new home builds goes to bureaucrats and not to those who are actually building the homes.
In Ontario today, 1/3 of the cost of every new home is direct taxes. That does not include the indirect taxes of, for example, income tax on construction workers and businesses, or all the paperwork and delays and consultants you have to pay just to get the building permits. I'm talking about direct taxes. So let's get this clear. When you buy a new home today, more of the money you spend goes to bureaucrats than goes to the carpenters, electricians, and plumbers who actually build the house.
Since becoming the federal Conservative leader in September of 2022, Poilievre has gone after the Liberal government over the increase in home prices and rents. Organizers of the Freedom Convoy are in court this week trying to appeal the dismissal of an anti-SLAPP motion in a $290 million class action lawsuit filed by Ottawa residents against the Freedom Convoy. Now, SLAPP stands for Strategic Lawsuits Against Public Participation. In February of 2022, a few Ottawa residents, along with a local union, filed the class action lawsuit against Tamara Leach, Chris Barber, and others seeking damages for the interruptions caused by the parking of the trucks and honking of horns in downtown Ottawa during the protest. Lawyers for the Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms tried to have the lawsuit dismissed, but to no avail. John Carpe is the president of the Justice Centre, and he joins us now from the Calgary airport on his way to Ontario for the court proceedings to talk about this in more detail. John, let's chat about your efforts to have this class action lawsuit thrown out.
Well, the action was filed in February of 2022 when the Freedom Convoy peaceful protest was in Ottawa, and Ottawa bureaucrat Zexi Lee and other Ottawa residents were upset about the horn honking, and so they filed the lawsuit and they sought an injunction, and the lawyers acting for the truckers were happy to sign a consent order, no more honking at night, because the truckers also wanted a good night's sleep. So that issue was resolved very quickly, and the horn honking that kept some people awake at night, it did last for a few days or a week, but after that it was gone. But now they're continuing with the action, seeking $290 million over losing some sleep, and the Justice Centre is providing lawyers to counter that, in part because they are seeking to create a new precedent that anybody who donated to Freedom Convoy should be held liable for any damages that result from the peaceful protest.
Now, can you see this case possibly dragging on for years? I mean, it's hard to believe that it may wrap up in a few short weeks.
Unfortunately, we have too few judges in Canada, and all court actions take years and years, and this one is no exception. Where it's at right now is that we tried to get the action dismissed for being an unfair attempt to silence peaceful protests. And we lost a trial on that, and that's now before the Ontario Court of Appeal, where we are seeking to have the case dismissed as just an unfair attack on charter rights and freedoms.
Thanks so much for your time today, John. That was President of the Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms, John Carpe, joining us from the Calgary airport. Vote counting continues in British Columbia after weekend counts failed to declare a winner. Elections BC says the party standings have not changed since the October 19th vote that saw the NDP leading or elected in 46 ridings. The BC Conservatives were leading or elected in 45 ridings and the Green Party in 2. Elections BC said it was counting absentee ballots on Monday, with the closest riding being Surrey-Guildford, where the Tories are ahead of the NDP by just 12 votes. Either one of the two parties needs 47 seats to form a majority government in BC's 93-seat legislature. While campaigning in Saskatoon over the weekend, Saskatchewan Party leader Scott Moe said incumbent provincial governments have had it really tough. Meanwhile, Saskatchewan's NDP leader Carla Beck said during her campaign stop in Saskatoon that there's a feeling of change out there right now. Voters head to the polls today in a provincial election that many believe is still Moe's to win. His Saskatchewan party is seeking a 5th straight majority after 17 years in office. Beck's NDP is looking to take back government for the first time since 2007. The campaign is largely focused on health care, affordability, and crime. Moe also raised the issue of school change rooms later in the race. According to Elections Saskatchewan, the first preliminary count is tonight, the second goes October the 30th, and the final count will take place on November the 9th. Nova Scotians will be heading to the polls 8 months early. The province's Premier Tim Houston called a snap election on November the 26th. He met with the province's Lieutenant Governor on Sunday to dissolve the General Assembly. Posting on X, Houston said there were 2 major reasons for the early election: financial pressures and the impending federal election. He says his government is ready to make major new investments in areas such as housing and affordability, but first wants residents to have their say.
We know the importance of lower taxes for economic growth. That's why, if re-elected, a Nova Scotia PC government will continue to lower taxes. I'm pleased to announce we will reduce income taxes across the board by increasing the basic personal exemption from $8,744 to $11,744 for every single tax filer. If you file a tax return, you will feel this change.
Houston also announced a 1% decrease in HST, despite a previous plan by the Liberals in Nova Scotia for a 2% decrease. While we experience more gusty winds today in Lethbridge, Jeanette Rocher is now with an early peek of the forecast. Jeanette, the autumn wind may die off and making way for what, a little snow?
Yeah, Hal, it does look like we are seeing a 30% chance of flurries on Tuesday. And I'm not talking about the yummy Dairy Queen kind either, unfortunately. But it does look like these flurries should happen early in the morning. But then the good news is by the afternoon, they should be clearing up quite a little bit. We're seeing a daytime high tomorrow of 4 degrees. Also expect some wind chill in the morning, feeling more like -7 early in the morning and then up to 4 degrees. And by Wednesday, here's the great news. We're going to be back up to double digits. We're going to see some sunshine. So even if we do get a little bit of flurry activity on Tuesday, it should not be making a lasting impression. I'll be back later in the show to give you the full week forecast.
Thanks so much, Jeanette. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says the strike by the Israel Defense Forces on the Islamic Republic in Iran targeted missile production facilities along with Iranian air defense capabilities.
אני מבקש להדגיש, אלה לא היו מחרטות שתקפנו. כן, זה לא מעבדות נפץ קטנות, כפי שאתם מכירים מיהודה ושומרון או מרצועת עזה. אלה מפעלי מוות תעשייתיים, בהיקף תעשייתי. ופגענו בהם פגיעה של ממש. אני מודה לבעלות בריתנו, בראשן ארצות הברית, על שיתוף הפעולה המתמשך. אנחנו נשיב את כולם. החיים והחללים. לא נרפה, גם ברגעים אלה.
Officials at NATO say they've confirmed that North Korean troops have been sent to Russia to aid in its close to 3-year war against Ukraine. Some have already been deployed in Russia's Kursk border region, where the Russian military has been struggling with pushback from a Ukrainian incursion.
The deployment of North Korean troops represents one, a significant escalation in the DPRK's ongoing involvement in Russia's illegal war. Two, yet another breach of UN Security Council resolutions. And three, a dangerous expansion of Russia's war. NATO calls on Russia and the DPRK to cease these actions immediately.
A new report by Food Banks Canada says it recorded more than 2 million visits in March of this year. That's nearly double the monthly visits just 5 years ago. At the North York Harvest Warehouse in Toronto, volunteers have been hard at work sorting through food donations.
This year, the big finding is that we have hit the grim milestone of over 2 million visits to food banks in a single month in 2024. This represents a nearly doubling since 2019, so a 90% increase since 2019, since before the pandemic. It took us 30 years to get to 1 million visits a month, and then we stayed steady. And then it took us 5 years to double. So we're seeing a rate of growth we've never seen in food banks before since we began in the early 1980s. One of my biggest concerns as at Food Banks Canada is just how taxing this has been on the food bankers themselves. I was in Lethbridge a couple weeks ago visiting with food banks in southern Alberta, and there were folks in tears. You know, when you've got more and more people coming through the door of your food bank and the donations and the shelves are getting bare behind you, it's not an easy position to be. We didn't end the pandemic. We've been in constant crisis since 2020.
A 66-year-old man from Medicine Hat died following a collision between a motorbike and an SUV Sunday in Redcliffe. Police say the incident occurred on Highway 1 just east of Boundary Road. Both vehicles were traveling eastbound at the time of the collision. The man who was riding the bike at the time was transported to Medicine Hat Hospital, where he later died from his injuries. The driver of the SUV was uninjured. The cause of the collision is still under investigation. Close to $2.5 million worth of drugs and cash were seized in Edmonton. Police say the drugs were discovered October 9th at a southwest Edmonton condo building. Alert Edmonton has issued a warrant for an Edmonton man, 36-year-old Min Nagoyan, who faces a wide range of drug-related charges. Alert says there was close to $2.3 million worth of drugs, which included cocaine, pills, magic mushrooms, and methamphetamine. The drug seizure is the largest in Edmonton so far this year. Officials with the City of Lethbridge, along with 19 partnered organizations representing Team Lethbridge, will head up to Edmonton this November to advocate on behalf of the city. Team Lethbridge visits Edmonton on a biannual basis to chat with provincial officials and ministers and raising awareness of the city's contributions and support roles to the province. A group planning session was held at the Sandman Hotel in Lethbridge in Monday for preparation. Trevor Lewington, the head of Economic Development Lethbridge, named some of the initiatives the team is focusing on presenting while in Edmonton.
It's really an opportunity to advocate for Lethbridge. We want to showcase to the folks in Edmonton everything that Lethbridge has to offer, but also make sure we're on the radar when it comes to future grant opportunities, capital projects. So it's really about advocacy. One of the key issues we're focused on is water and wastewater. We know that Lethbridge is running out of capacity for both potable water and wastewater. And as the city grows both in population and for new industry, that's something that needs to be solved long term. So the government has provided some initial money for some studies, but ultimately it's multiple hundreds of millions of dollars of capital that we're going after. Some of the other issues, of course, are wraparound services for some of the social challenges. Housing is affecting every community, but we want to make sure the government clearly understands what some of the unique differences are here in Lethbridge.
Team Lethbridge will be sending their delegation to Edmonton on November 5th and returning on the 7th. Workers at Covenant Health St. Therese Villa in Lethbridge have entered into negotiations with their employer. According to Curtis Jackson, Vice President of the Alberta Union of Provincial Employees Executive Office South Region, they're looking for a potential wage increase of 35% over 2 years. He says the offer from the employer is far from that.
When our workers go in and our negotiators go in and state what our financial position is, the employers return with an offer of 7.5% over 4 years. This offer has been repeated regardless whether workers are in healthcare, government sector, post-secondary institutions, and private sector long-term care facilities. So the 7.5% is the same offer everyone is getting at the table. And that's over 4 years. So that breaks down to 2%, 2%, 1.75, 1.75. And what we're seeing as a result is we're seeing workers leaving this province in a large amount and going to other provinces where they're paid more.
Jackson says there are now about 82,000 public sector workers in negotiations across the province, and they're seeing the same offer across the board. Spending time in front of screens is now part of many people's daily routine. Work and study are the main reasons why many of us spend long hours in front of our computers. Now, what's the recommended amount of time suggested by specialists for both adults and children alike? Lethbridge Polytechnic professor and researcher Dr. Simon Shares explains what the recommendations are based on age and what we can do to ensure that long hours in front of our electronic devices do not negatively affect us.
Certainly for sort of kids under the age of 2, recommendations right now are that they have no screen time whatsoever. 2 to 4, we're looking at maybe an hour tops over the course of the day. And then 5 and up, so into their teens, we're looking at 2 hours and no more of that. For adults, certainly the screen time is quite high over the course of the day, right? And so there's some other things, recommendations that might be helpful. Certainly, we're giving yourself a little bit of time for the nervous system to disengage from the screen is beneficial. And so ideally, you do that every 20 minutes, you get up and you walk around for a bit. If you're kind of bound to the screen and you can't really get up, then every 20 minutes or so, there's this rule called the 20-20-20 rule. So every 20 minutes, you look up, you stare at an object about 20 feet away for 20 seconds as a way of kind of disengaging the nervous system from the screen, and then you can go back into it. And there's other things as well you can do, like, for instance, glasses, right? Many of them now come with blue screen protection. And so that can be really helpful too.
According to Stats Canada, youth with higher self-esteem were less likely to report spending over 2 hours per day in each of the 3 screen time behaviors examined. As a heads up for families in Lethbridge, the Discovery Playground at Legacy Park is currently closed and undergoing warranty work on the structure. The grounds closed on Monday with crews aiming to repair the railings throughout the structure. The city recommends other nearby sites children can play at, including the new Chinook Lake Park. Work at Legacy Park is expected to last around 2 weeks. Well, we had a fairly mild day across much of southwestern Alberta today, but some of that white stuff is on the way. Full weather details are on deck. It was so nice hitting double-digit plus temperatures again today in Lethbridge. Jeanette Rocher is now with all of the weather details. Jeanette, it appears as though the mercury may drop by quite a bit, making way for some snow soon?
Well, how about if we just call them some light flurries for now instead of full-blown snow? But yes, we will be seeing a little bit of white stuff on Tuesday. Only a 30% chance, and that's to happen early in the morning. By the afternoon, it should be clearing up quite a bit. Expect that daytime high of 4 degrees as well as early morning wind chill, feeling like -7 as we get ready to head off to work tomorrow. After that, though, Wednesday, seeing clear sunny skies, high of 10 degrees. So there's that 10 digits or double digits again. Yeah, 6 degrees for a high on Thursday, high of 4 degrees on Friday. Same thing for Saturday, and then up to 9 on a Sunday. Okay, so you will see that this average high and lows, it's actually getting lower. So now the average high for this time of year is 9 degrees only. Average low -4. 24 was our record high on this day. That happened back in 2008. And in 1946, we were sitting at a chilly -19. Sun rose this morning at 8:15. Sunset this evening. Look at that, 6:14. That means 9 hours, 59 minutes of daylight. So we're now under 10 hours of daylight. It is happening. Days are getting a lot shorter. Looking to the west coast tomorrow, Victoria seeing a chance of some afternoon showers there, 11 degrees for a high. Mainly cloudy skies in Vancouver. Also some patches of fog dissipating in the morning, 11 for a high there. For the expected high tomorrow in Edmonton with sunshine, wind chill in the morning there as well. Early morning flurries expected in Calgary, then clearing up. Also expect some morning wind chill, but a daytime high of 4 degrees there. As we get to the rest of the prairies, we are seeing those -digit wind chills in the morning and then climbing to the pluses for the afternoon. 3 degrees, the expected high tomorrow in Saskatoon, 5 in Regina, clear skies, both of those cities, mainly cloudy skies though in Winnipeg with double digits of 10 degrees tomorrow. As we look to the central part of the country, we're seeing a 40% chance of afternoon showers. In Toronto, could see a chance of a thunderstorm there as well. High of 19, 9 only the expected high in Ottawa, expecting some showers in the afternoon there as well. Could see some thunderstorms, mix of sun and cloud in Montreal with 13 for the high. So still sticking in those teen temperatures there. We're seeing mainly sunny skies across the Maritimes, 7 for the high in Fredericton, 8 in Halifax, 6 for the high in Charlottetown with a mix of sun and cloud. And then we could see some early morning showers in St. John's, clearing later on in the day, high of 6 degrees there and 20 to 40 K winds. So there you have it. That is your forecast.
Canada's on track to be the world's third largest wheat exporter for the second year in a row. Global data from the U.S. Department of Agriculture shows Canada overtaking Australia for the title, coming third only to Russia and the European Union when it comes to wheat export volumes. Australia's wheat crop has suffered in recent years due to drought and extreme weather. In Canada, this fall's harvest is largely complete, and farmers are reporting better yields than last year. Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada says total crop production in the country for 2024-25 is estimated to be up 1.8% from last year and 2.4% above the previous 5-year average. Farmers say investments in plant breeding, genetics, and technology are helping them produce bigger yields over time. Dock workers at the Port of Montreal are off the job for 24 hours amid a labor dispute with their employer. The union, representing nearly 1,200 longshore workers at the country's second biggest port, served notice on Thursday for a complete work stoppage from 7 a.m. Sunday until Monday. The move comes on top of an ongoing strike on overtime shifts and a 3-day strike at 2 container terminals that ended earlier this month. Now, here's a look at today's markets.
The TSX was up 101 basis points to 24,565. The Dow was also up 273 points to 42,387. The S&P 500 was up 15 points to 5,823, and the Nasdaq was also up 48 points to 18,567. West Texas Intermediate oil was down $3.80 to $67.98 US per barrel. Natural gas was down 25 cents to $2.27 US. Gold was down 70 cents to $2,740.20 US an ounce, and silver was up 19 cents at $33.80 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $8.25 per bushel, barley is at $6.12, canola is at $14.38, and corn is at $7.37 per bushel. Live cattle were up 47 cents to $190.17. Feeder cattle were up 45 cents to $250.07, and lean hogs December contract were up 95 cents at $80.62. And the Canadian dollar was up slightly over the past 24 hours and currently sits at 72 cents US.
Recapping one of our top stories, well, today was deadline day for Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to respond to a request by 24 Liberal MPs calling for his resignation as party leader. Trudeau has already said he plans to stay on as head of the Liberal Party of Canada. Now, on Tuesday, Trudeau faces another deadline, this time from the Bloc Québécois. Party leader Yves-François Blanchet has threatened to begin discussions with other opposition parties about toppling the minority government if the Liberals don't pass 2 pieces of legislation. You know, with so many people hurting financially right now, has the church really dropped the ball when it comes to helping to meet the needs of our most vulnerable? Senior pastor of Parallel Church, Kelly Stickle, says yes, and he wrote a book on the topic called Let's Take Our Job Back, and he'll offer up his thoughts shortly. When you see news happening in your community, be sure to send us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. Also, be sure to visit our website anytime to check out a number of stories and interviews. So what is church? And how do those who don't have a relationship with Jesus Christ view the church? As fellow believers, are we doing our part to invite enough people to church? Joining us today to chat about some of these questions is Pastor Kelly Stickle. He's the lead pastor of Parallel Church here in Lethbridge and author of his 4th book, Let's Take Our Job Back. Welcome back to Bridge City News, Pastor Kelly.
Thanks, Hal. It's great to be with you again.
You bet. Now, your book discusses where we are as a church today. In your opinion, where are we potentially dropping the ball, maybe as believers?
Yeah, well, this book began in earnest at the beginning of COVID when we first got locked down, and all of us were kind of left confused, and especially in the church world as we had to close our doors and different things. And the prevailing question that was in my mind was, had we reduced our Christianity in the West to a personal private faith and just a weekly social gathering? And that I couldn't shake that question, and so I was like, "Man, I gotta discover for myself what the early church did, what their foundation was when the governments were really trying to shut them down." And started doing a deep dive study into the first 3 centuries of Christianity, and was shocked what I discovered, and discovered that a lot of things that they majored in, we in the West in Christianity today minor in, and what they minored in, we major in. And so I was like, oh, I've got to shift how I think about church and how I see it.
So where do you think we should maybe lay the blame for the shortcomings of the church? Should we all maybe take responsibility for that?
Yeah, and I drove to the scriptures right away and got fascinated by Nehemiah's prayer, in particular in Nehemiah chapter 1. And in Nehemiah 1 and verse 6, there's a verse is the verse that just jumped out at me and I couldn't shake it. There's one statement he makes, and he says, "I and my father's house have sinned." And it caught my attention because, Nehemiah is praying this prayer approximately 160 years after the fall of Jerusalem. So he was not even alive. He was born into captivity. He wasn't even alive when this is. And yet he takes personal responsibility for the state of his city. And it really rocked me to the core, because I thought, man, what would happen if we all took responsibility for the state of our country, for the state of our nation? And then as I began to meditate on that, I had this thought roll around my head that the word responsibility is really, it's 2 words. It's respondability, and that whoever takes responsibility is given the ability to respond. And when we cast blame on someone else, we give them the ability to respond. But if we take personal responsibility, then we give ourselves and empower ourselves to respond. So I do think that we should take personal responsibility in order to affect change.
I like that, respondent ability. I'll have to remember that the next time. Now, Pastor Kelly, looking back, we see that the early church also faced a lot of similar challenges. How do those churches really respond, and what can we maybe learn from them?
Yeah, it's interesting. They took personal responsibility, but they really took upon themselves, and I hadn't noticed this before, hadn't been taught this before in Bible college, but the activities of the early church, they really, really focused on taking care of the needs around them. And what they were known for, primarily from both the Roman authorities and from the populace that we have letters of and still today, was that they took care of the poor and the needy, and to such a degree that Emperor Julian the Apostate at the end of the 4th century lamented that the Christians, and the church in particular, had more influence in his empire than he did as emperor of the most powerful nation in the world. And I was like, yeah, it's simply because of their care for the poor, in his words. And so I was like, wow, they really majored in the 6 things that Jesus taught us to do in Matthew 25, when he said to the disciples, when I was hungry, you feed me, and when I'm thirsty, you give me drink. That they majored in that, and that was their primary activity. And I thought, wow, that's a side project for most of us today. And throughout history, I began to discover that the early church was, they ran all social services of the society, and that they started the first hospitals and ran all of the healthcare for centuries, and that they ran all and started all of the education, universities, public schools, all started within the church, and went, man, we ran all of that at one point and were providers of all of that. And yet over time, we've abdicated that responsibility and handed all of that social services to agencies and to the government. We've handed education to the government. We've handed healthcare to the government. And we've just reduced our faith to a weekly social gathering, a building that people can attend once a week, and wondering why we are ineffective, and going, well, What if we took our job back, each one of us?
You know, many of us like to actually blame the government for a lot of the issues we have today. And, you know, we like to look at God's kingdom as how things should truly be run. But what should this actually look like as we say, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven?
Yeah, and that prayer is powerful. We pray it over and over again and miss really the meaning of the Lord's Prayer in a massive way. But that is an invitation of the kingdom of God. Jesus saying, pray, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. So it's an invitation of God's kingdom or God's government, God's way of doing things to earth, where I think many of us Christians in our Western theologies, we look at the world and we lament how dark it's become. We lament at how terrible it is, and we cannot wait for the rapture, and we can't wait to get pulled out of here, and we're gonna, and we think the kingdom of God, we're gonna escape this bad, cruel world and enter the kingdom of God in heaven, where Jesus taught his followers to bring the kingdom of God and to pray the kingdom of God here on earth as it is in heaven. That our main role here on while we are here is very much on purpose, for a purpose, and that's to bring God's will and God's kingdom and the light into the darkness that's our world.
So outside of your own church, Parallel Church, can you share some other examples of churches which are doing a wonderful job of reaching others and advancing the kingdom?
Yeah, I tell the story in my book of a friend of mine, Pastor Tim Lucas, and his church in New Jersey, Liquid Church. In 2021, they began to talk about and he discovered in reading an article that the majority of bankruptcies that happen in the United States actually happen because of medical debt. So he presented this to his church, and they did an offering, and they raised $13.7 million to erase 3,800 people's medical debt in, not just in the church, but all around in the community, and just, completely erased 3,800 people's debts. And I was like, wow. I mean, if you don't think that's going to make an impact for the kingdom of God, and lives being changed as well. And then, there's churches in our area that we partner with. Here in Lethbridge, there's a number of churches that we partner with, but there's churches in Church of God in Brooks is a great example of reaching out in the community. We've got Life Church in Medicine Hat's another one that does the same thing. So it's we're excited about it and starting to see churches that are saying, "Hey, I'm going to take the responsibility for the needs in my community, and it's our job to meet those needs."
So now you believe that the church really needs to become the solution for the needs of our community, as we were just discussing. Can you expand on that even further?
Yeah, I think what would happen, and this is part of what launched the book, is once I discovered all these the history, I thought, man, this history needs to be taught and known. I wasn't taught this in Bible college, like I said, and the activities of the church. I was taught their theologies and what they believed and what we should believe, but I wasn't taught their activities necessarily. And so I thought, I got to write this down and teach all these activities, and realize that the Christians took upon themselves the responsibility of the care of the needy and those in there. And I thought, well, what would happen? And imagine if, and I started dreaming, imagine if every church we've got churches in every community across this country, but imagine if every church said, hey, the greatest problem in my community is going to be my responsibility to solve. And what would happen if we took that upon ourselves and said, hey, we're going to band together as Christians in this community and solve the most dire needs in our community? The church would become, again, the hope of the world. And I think it would change dramatically the state of our country and the state of our communities.
Some churches in communities that I've lived in have become very insular. Instead of reaching out to the other churches and really joining forces to uplift the community and to really reach people for Christ. How can we change that mindset, Pastor Kelly, and not be so insular, but be more community-minded, community-focused, and join together for the case of Christ?
I think the easiest way, Hal, is if we have a united purpose and a problem to solve, we are going to be unified. If we reduce our faith to the weekly social gatherings, then we're going to become competitive with one another, because we're competing on who can have the largest gathering on a weekend. And meanwhile, our communities are struggling and hurting. if we started to take on the responsibility of our communities and said, this is our problem to solve as churches, and we've seen that here in Lethbridge, as we launched My City Care and did that, we had a number of churches come alongside us and say, hey, can we help, and can we be a part of solving these problems as well? And we've had, right now we've got 189 agencies and and churches in the community of Lethbridge that have all band together and said, we're helping and working one another at solving the problems in our community. And I think that unifying factor has joined all of us together in a much, much tighter way, because we've got a common problem to solve.
So what kind of excuses do you hear, however, for people that don't really want to engage in their community or maybe help out at church and do their job?
Well, I think the primary excuse is, well, who are we and what difference could we possibly make? The problems are too big. And it's not going to make that big of a difference anyway. All these excuses, and if we truly try to help, I mean, there's other people that are doing a better job. We don't want to step on toes. We don't want to offend. All these excuses. And I come back to Nehemiah. Nehemiah in verse 6 took personal responsibility. He said, "I and my father's house have sinned," even though he wasn't there. He took personal responsibility, and he must have the same thought, like, who am I that I could make a difference? Because he was a prisoner of war, a slave, a cupbearer to the king. And he's like, he had every excuse in the book as to why it wasn't him that could do anything for his city. Yet in verse 10 in Nehemiah 1, Nehemiah says, I serve the King of Kings first. It's not by my power, but by his great power. It's not by my strong hand, it's by his strong hand. And in doing that, and then he says, I'm part of God's chosen people. So he recognized, first of all, even though he was a slave, that he identified not by his circumstances or by his job description at the time, that he identified first as a chosen person, a member of God's chosen people. And Paul says in Colossians 3 that we are God's chosen people now as believers. And Paul says in 2 Corinthians that we are the ambassadors. It's our responsibility. We're the ambassadors here on earth for the King of Kings, that we need to re-anchor ourselves in our identity in Christ in order to have the courage to respond.
Okay, let's talk about, evangelizing and reaching out to other communities as fellow believers. A lot of times there has to be a transformation in someone's heart. How does that really work, to create that transformation to reach people for Christ?
I think as the church in the West, we are more commonly known for what we stand against rather than what we stand for. And I think we can transform and what we preach. It's interesting that Jesus's ministry, the disciples' ministry in the book of Acts, the early church that I studied in the first 3 centuries in particular, they all took care of the physical felt needs within their communities first. Jesus would often walk into community before he ever preached a sermon and begin to heal the sick and cast out demons and lay hands on the lepers, and all of the ministry, the felt needs that he met first in order to, take away the cares of their lives, to be able to listen and to be receptive to the message. And I think that's where we've got it wrong a lot of times in the West, is that we have reduced our faith to something that we just preach, and we expect the rejection, but we've often neglected the first responsibility, which I think is to meet the needs in our community. And that people, we've discovered by launching My City Care and taking care of the needs of people, if people are really receptive to the gospel when they are delivered hope first. And I think the most valuable currency on the planet today is hope. And we've abdicated all of the centers of hope to the governments. And we said, they're providing the education, they're providing the social services, they're providing the healthcare. And so they basically own all of the hope. And Jesus called us to be the hope of the world as the church. And if we take our job back, and that's really what the book's all about, is what, practical ways that we can learn from the past and begin to take our job back so that we can deliver hope first. And in that, it's easy to say that hope is Jesus, and that's where we got it from, and you got to be a part of it.
Amen. Faith, hope, and love. Pastor Kelly, you talked a bit about My City Care. Why don't you explain to our viewers what it is and how it's really impacting our community here through Parallel Church?
Yeah, well, My City Care is not just Parallel Church. We have churches in multiple denominations in over 68 communities now that are operating My City Care in one facet or another. And My City Care is what it is. It's me taking responsibility for my city or my town, my village, my community, and providing care. And there's multiple ways of doing it. It's not an organization for someone to join. It's basically a movement saying, hey, we're a group of people that are going to take personal responsibility for our city and provide care and identify, see a need, and then meet a need. Like, we're going to identify the greatest needs in our community, and we're going to find solutions and provide solutions. So in Lethbridge here, we're taking on, met with our mayor and council, and they said, yeah, the greatest need in Lethbridge right now is housing. And we said, well, we've made all the excuses as to why that couldn't be us. But I sat down with the mayor and said, hey, could we take that on and take it as our responsibility? And what if we took that on? He said, it'd be amazing if you guys did. So we're in the process right now of purchasing land, just in the process of rezoning. And so the purchase has gone through, just rezoning it right now to be able to do that, to build apartment complexes instead of building another sanctuary auditorium and putting all of that money into a weekly social gathering. We're like, what if we put it into the greatest need in our community and invested there and provided housing for people? We provide, clothing. We provide in our street stores. We provide food on a daily basis for those who need it. We provide services like coming up this Christmas, Shop of Wonders, where we provide, those for children who can't afford having a Christmas together as a family, and they can't afford to provide for their children. We provide a toy store where they can come and shop and for free and wrap up with dignity and wrap up gifts and presents that they've chosen for their children. And so we do all these things to bring hope back, the hope of Jesus back to our community.
Pastor Kelly Stickle is the author of Let's Take Our Job Back and lead pastor at Parallel Church here in Lethbridge. You can find his book at letstakeourjobback.com. Pastor Kelly, thanks so much for your time today.
Thanks so much, Hal, for having me.
Apparently it's not uncommon for people to walk over 160,000 kilometers in their lifetime. That's a whole lot of walking, a whole lot of adventures, and sometimes a lot of discomfort if you're someone who has some foot problems. We're going to dive in and talk about some of the foot problems and solutions today with Emily Soper. She's a certified pedorthist with a degree in kinesiology. She's also the owner of Nexus Orthotics in Medicine Hat, Alberta. Emily, welcome to Bridge City News.
Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. So what are some of the more common type of foot problems that people are experiencing right now?
Yeah, some of the most common ones that I see here in the office are probably bunions, hammer toes, plantar fasciitis, Morton's neuroma, to name a few. But yeah, it's pretty common that those four pop up weekly.
As a matter of fact, I experienced a little bit of the hammer toe situation myself because I grew so fast, my feet grew so big when I was a kid. My parents couldn't keep up with the new shoes, and the toes don't exactly sit flat. They're a little bit curled here. So you see a lot more of that with kids today?
Yeah, I do see a lot with that. I mean, it's hard for parents to keep up with how fast the kids grow, and kids sometimes don't always tell you. And it's hard to buy a shoe beginning of the year and then have to replace it again in December. So, especially with today's costs, I do see it more often than not. But again, there's a hereditary factor in some cases where the second toe is longer, and then in that case, over time, it definitely claws back out of the way.
What advice would you give to parents? Maybe buy more sandals for the kids?
Yeah, no, not so much. It depends on the kid too, but you always want to make sure that you're getting a thumb space from the end of their longest toe to the end of the shoe when buying shoes at the store, for sure.
What are some of the causes, Emily, of a lot of the foot issues we're seeing today, and are they even preventable?
Yeah, a lot of the causes I would say are probably shoes. That's probably the number one. A lot of the shoes that we buy are not the greatest, and people actually don't really know what to buy for what specific activities they're doing, as well as it can be even job related, like working on concrete all day can wear and tear on the body, and even dress shoes for sure if you have to dress up more for work as well.
So I guess walking on the concrete all day is not very helpful, I guess, for a lot of your foot and back issues?
I guess you could walk through Costco and ask some of those employees working there, and they probably are a little grumpy and tired from standing on concrete all day. Yeah, it is. Our bodies are not designed to walk on concrete, so it definitely plays a big factor in pain for sure.
So how much does the foot really impact our backs if we have foot problems? That relates to some of maybe the back issues that we have as well.
Yes, it definitely can. So a lot of times if you're not walking, your gait's a little bit off. Let's say you're wearing have you ever seen those kids wear UGG boots and they're wearing them inward? That excess strain where the shoe and the foot is rotating in can definitely strain all the way up to the back over time. So it does play a big factor in back pain for sure.
How dangerous is it? I've seen a lot of times on social media, a lot of advertisements for footwear. You know, people like, hey, buy these shoes, you can buy, but you're not actually trying them on to see if it's a good, proper fit. People are just buying it online. How dangerous is that? So when you get them, you try them on, it's like, they're not very comfortable at all.
Yeah, I mean, I even get advertisements on Facebook and Google all the time because obviously I'm looking at shoes on a regular basis. I've had some people who've had success. I've even bought shoes online before too, but generally I know the brand before I'm buying it and I already know what size I am. So it's a risk. If they have a good return policy, maybe you could try it out. But a lot of the stuff online is geared towards let's get more cushion on your feet. You don't need cushion. Most of the time, we need more structured shoes on concrete, which is the opposite to what people think.
Really? So you need a lot more of that support? What about people that have flat feet? How can you really help them? The arch has really fallen.
Yeah, flat feet. I mean, it just generally depends if you've had flat feet your whole life. Some people with flat feet their whole life generally sometimes don't have any pain, but there are some who definitely do. If you just think of it as a car, if you have low shock on your car or high, you generally feel those bumps along the way a little bit more.
How common is plantar fasciitis? Maybe you can explain to our viewers exactly what it is.
Yeah, so plantar fasciitis, it's pretty common. I'm sure you've heard someone or know someone who's had it. You've heard that dreaded plantar fasciitis kind of kicking around. So it just generally means plantar fascia, and then itis means inflammation in the foot. So it's just a pain in that plantar part of your foot. So it can be caused by all kinds of things. I would say the big one is a tight calf, actually. Your calf gets a little bit tight from sitting or standing on concrete without stretching. It can definitely impact your foot there for sure.
So what are some of the symptoms we should really look out for?
So some of the symptoms would be that first startup pain in the morning, those first few steps when you get out of bed. So let's say your heel or your arch is hurting when you wake up and you have to go to the bathroom, and then it eases off after those 10 steps. A nice stabbing pain in the heel is a good one, or in the inside of the heel as well. Also, sometimes people explain that it feels like you're taking a rubber band and stretching it across your arch during the day. So it can increase the more you walk on those first few steps for sure when you sit down, like after lunch or dinner, and get back up.
Can orthotic insoles actually help to treat plantar fasciitis? How do they work?
Yeah, so they definitely can help for sure. So what the orthotics are designed to do is they're designed to distribute plantar pressure throughout your foot so you don't have that high area of strain in the arch. So you add that orthotic in there and it takes some of that strain off every time you're walking. It's kind of like the major science behind it, but a lot of times I'm kind of adding shoe changes or some exercises to do at home as well to kind of get to the real cause of what's causing this foot problem.
Are the orthotic insoles used maybe as a preventative measure as well?
Yeah, you can definitely use it as a preventative measure. Let's say you have severely high arches, and over time that high arch can lead to a lot of pressure in the ball of your foot and can cause hammer toes and Morton's neuroma and all kinds of issues up there, or maybe even plantar fasciitis. So it can kind of prevent those types of things, or even someone with a very flat foot can help prevent it from getting even more flat. Especially diabetic patients, actually. If you're diabetic, you should look into more preventative maintenance for later on before you have any issues.
Can you explain what night splints are and how they actually work?
Yeah, night splints. Actually, I have one sitting back here, right beside that knee brace. I'll grab it. So it looks like this. It's basically just stretches your foot while you're sleeping. So if you have a hard time stretching as much as you need to during the day to get rid of plantar fasciitis, the night splint is a bulky option to kind of help. It's usually the last resort if we're really having a hard time getting that flexibility back in the calf.
So Emily, how about potentially just doing foot stretches and using ice packs, or maybe even seeing a reflexologist? Would that help?
Yeah, that's always a good option. We always say stretching first because I think that orthotics aren't the be all and end all the time. There's lots of things that you can do yourself before seeking help. There's lots of good Dr. Google things that will tell you that you can do some stretches at home. And stretches is never a bad thing, for sure.
It's funny, I'm doing some foot stretches right now as we speak, pointing the toes back and forth under the desk here that you can't see. So maybe that's a good thing as we're talking about it.
Exactly. You can do that just while sitting at your desk.
Emily, can you explain what Achilles tendonitis is and what treatments are readily available?
Yeah, so Achilles tendonitis, again, it's that itis word, inflammation in the Achilles tendon. So Achilles tendonitis. It's basically just an inflammation in the Achilles. So a lot of times, again, tight calf can cause that. But most of the time I see just if you're either rolling out or rolling in, so that abnormal kind of walking that you're doing can cause that extra strain and pull on the Achilles. It's a fun one to treat. It can be a little bit finicky. Sometimes it can take a while to get rid of it, but it is interesting once you do get it right that it kind of just smartens up and goes back to normal.
Now you talk about proper footwear and the structure of a shoe being inclusive in the proper footwear. What does that actually look like?
Yeah, so I wish I had a shoe for an example for you today, but so soft and squishy things, like generally if you can take the shoe and rotate it and squish it into a ball, I would say don't buy that for any long distance walking for sure. You want a strong heel counter, so meaning that the back of the heel is stiff. So when you have those ones where you can just slide in, that has zero control around the ankle. So again, it will allow your foot to rotate in or out depending on what you're doing. And then wide base of support. So I'm sure you've seen like high heels or like very narrow shoes on the base. That's just generally not supporting your foot at all, and your arch can kind of hang off the side and lead to more pressure in that area. And then as well, size. So size makes the biggest difference. So if you have too tight of shoes or you're wearing those pointed shoes, generally over time, your foot will just kind of go to that way. So you'll end up with bunions, hammer toes, claw toes, all that fun stuff. And a lot of people don't realize that if you squish your foot into something, it doesn't keep it small. It actually makes it bigger over time. So that's something to keep in mind as well.
What advice do you have for the ladies who like to wear a lot of the heels, maybe the 3, 4, even 5-inch heels, you know, over many, many years? What does that do to the foot and to the back?
Yeah, over time, actually, it does a lot of damage. So generally, a lot of women are more prone to bunions because of what we put on our feet. So that pointed toe or the excess pressure on the ball of the foot will just flatten it over time. So your foot will get wider, you'll get bunions, hammer toes. And then if you think about it, if you wear a high heel all day, that just shortens your Achilles. So a lot of women, when they're retiring from wearing high heels or they can't wear them anymore, lack that range of motion. And it's really hard to go back down to a runner. It takes a lot of work. And sometimes we still have to put a heel lift into the shoe because they're just too tight at that point.
Now, if people do actually want to go running or jogging, what should they look for in a good running shoe?
There's so many different shoes on the market. I guess it really depends kind of what kind of heel striker or midfoot or forefoot striker you want to be. So if you strike in the heel, obviously that puts a little bit more pressure onto the knee. So if you're someone who struggles with knee pain, I would suggest going with a lower drop heel to do more of a midfoot strike. Again, it's preference for people who are running. So there's lots of really cushion ones where it promotes more of a heel strike and then, more midfoot striker. So I guess it's preference because there's a lot of different options for running that you can do.
Emily, let's talk a bit about compression stockings. What are they and what are their true benefits?
Now, compression stockings are actually fairly beneficial for the majority of the population. If you have no issue getting blood flow down, I would say you could probably get away with wearing them daily. Over time, the body just has a hard time getting the blood back up to your heart. The blood doesn't get up just magically. It actually gets up by the calf contracting. So if you have a sitting job or you're standing for long periods of time, there's potential that the blood just pools over time. So if you think about your veins, they are like a backflow valve. Every time your calf contracts, the veins open and then they close. So when you have excess pressure down and then the next level pressure, they get leaky. And that's how you can kind of develop with varicose veins, just some swelling, like edema, that kind of stuff over time. So they are beneficial for the majority of the public, especially women who tend to have a little bit more strain from pregnancies and issues like that. But definitely flying for sure. I would recommend flying with compression socks for pretty much everybody.
So apart from compression stockings, does it make a difference what type of socks a person may wear?
Not necessarily. I guess we do sweat a lot more with our hands and our feet, but it's, again, generally on preference. Natural fibers generally work a lot better for sweat. So if you're wearing something that's a little bit more natural, like merino wool or cotton, it generally is a little bit less sweaty. But again, that's a preference thing. If you're suffering from like athlete's foot or something like that, it's definitely, you want to keep it dry is kind of the process on that one.
I believe you also use ankle and wrist braces at your clinic. What are those used for specifically?
Yeah, so it just depends kind of what type of injuries that someone's coming in with. Like I do a lot of wrist bracing for carpal tunnel at night. So a lot of carpal tunnel bracing, ankle braces, a lot of athletes for reoccurring ankle sprains. So it just generally depends kind of what's walking through those doors or hobbling, I guess, in some cases, but yeah.
So any final advice on the best care for our feet? I'm thinking maybe at the end of the day, give yourself a nice foot massage to get the blood flowing properly, because we have a lot of nerve endings at the end of our feet, correct?
We do, yeah. And that's why I find reflexology is a good practice as well. Like, and you know, maybe you can convince that special someone at home to give you a foot massage if they will, if they will. But yeah, rolling a ball under your foot at the end of the day can definitely help loosen all of that walking that you've done. Because your feet are important, and it's unfortunate when they do start to hurt. You don't realize how annoying it is when they do.
Absolutely. Emily Soper is a certified podorthist and owner of Nexus Orthotics. Thanks so much for joining us today from Medicine Hat, Alberta.
Thank you so much for having me.
On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless, and thanks so much for watching.